So I'm joined by Alan Healy, a performance coach who specialises in mental fitness for athletes, to discuss the novel coronavirus, Covid-19. What an extraordinary few weeks it's been for the world. Obviously, sporting, the conversation has been macro, Alan, hasn't it, in recent terms? We've been talking about the all the events that are being cancelled and the implications for world sport, but thinking about it in micro terms, the experience for professional and indeed amateur athletes who dedicate so much of their lives to getting themselves into prime fitness, getting their bodies honed to absolute perfection, practicing techniques, and trying to have themselves at the optimum level at the right time to perform when they need to. And suddenly the carpet has been pulled out from underneath them. What does the athlete? First of all, what's the mindset of a
Yeah.
professional athlete, an amateur athlete at this moment in time?
Well, it's actually very difficult for athletes because doing their sport is part of their identity, especially if you're a pro athlete. Like if you're used to getting up every day and going out and riding your bike for 6 hours, or like all pro athletes practicing the sport day in, day out, and they're very focused on what the goals are later on in the year. But really, their identity is based around their sport. You take their sport away. If you know any athletes who gets an injury, for example, and they're out of sport for a while, you'll see a change in mood, you'll see a change in how they see themselves, and there's an absolute mind shift in terms of how athletes can feel. And some athletes can go as low as feeling depressed over the fact that they're not able to compete and not able to do what they normally do. And it really doesn't matter. And like I know many amateur athletes who take their sport very serious and just they really enjoy it. It's a big part of what they do. And there are many athletes who've been training all through the winter to get into the best condition possible. The season has just started. And for them, the season, it feels for some people like the season is over, even though it's not. Certainly it's over for the next while. And so it can be very, very difficult. And I think a lot of the time, people who generally aren't in sport, so any athletes listening to this will be nodding their head going, yeah, it is actually quite difficult. But I think anyone who's not in sport sometimes find it very difficult to understand why we think this way as athletes.
It's an unprecedented situation, isn't it? In some ways, you would imagine that the athlete is probably better organized, better focused, better prepared for self-isolation than any of the rest of us, because they've been practicing self-denial and removing themselves from society and not getting involved too much in social activity for such a long time. But of course, their bodies are honed to perfection. They're trained to for an incredible amount of physical output, and if they're not able to get that, then that hurts. So I suppose the question is, what do they do?
When it comes to an athlete stopping their sport, you can't just stop them, because it actually hurts them in two ways, both physically and mentally. It's not good when you have somebody who's that highly fit, who's normally used to training for so many hours per week, and then you turn around and say, well, you can't do that anymore, and you can just take a break for the next while. So it's actually not good from a physical point of view. And in fact, if you look at pro cyclists, for example, when a pro cyclist finish racing, the doctors will tell them, now you need to ease back into your training. You don't suddenly just stop. And then psychologically, as we've mentioned, it's extremely difficult for an athlete to just suddenly stop doing what they would normally do. So it is quite hard for them.
Yeah, so professional athletes are actually told at the end of their career to actually just sort of continue to exercise, just reduce it and reduce the volume. And that's because it's such an abrupt experience for professional athletes at the moment. So mentally it's difficult, it's challenging. Physically it's challenging, as we've discussed. But for some, I suppose they'll see this as an opportunity. For others, there'll be immense frustration, an awful lot of anxiety, a lot of worry. I mean, I suppose you mentioned their identity, but also their income is wrapped up in being properly physically and technically prepared for their event, as they see every day passing without proper full training as they would normally experience it. They're probably starting to feel like it's ebbing away, their ability to do the job to the very highest level, and so that's naturally going to cause all sorts of anxiety. So what can an athlete do to offset this difficult problem?
Well, one of the things that causes anxiety for anyone is the loss of control. So we don't know what's happening. That's the issue in some respects. They're looking further into the future, but not knowing exactly what's going to happen in that way. And so there's that less loss of control. But that's no different to how people suffer anxiety most days. And so what we're looking at people to be able to do is to get that control back. And so instead of looking to the future and constantly looking to the future, we're looking to do stuff today. You take control of what you can today. That's why managing the process and keeping the habits up on a daily basis are so important. That it's not just looking at what you've lost, but also what opportunities are actually out there for you. And that's number one on the list for most people, would be to actually look to see not just what you've lost in terms of, you've done all this training and suddenly the events aren't there for you now. It's actually, what opportunities can I take from that? What can I control? You may not be able to control the fact that the racing isn't there for you now, but you can certainly control what you're doing on a daily basis to get you, or to keep and maintain your fitness level going through as you come further into the season.
So give us some examples of what you can do, on your own or in around the house, or if you're able to get out. And not every country is it possible for an athlete to actually get out and go for a run or go for a bike ride, or get out onto a field and practice some exercises. Some are actually being told they have to stay confined to barracks and remain in the home. What are the sort of practical routines and habits that they can get into to get themselves through this difficult period?
Okay, so if you look at my setup, and even from my point of view, and Declan, I am not a good cyclist, but even from my setup in the house, I have already got the weight set up in one corner of the room, because the three of us in the house that regularly go to the gym. So we've created our own little gym, if you like, within the house. So you create a space. It doesn't have to be a huge space, but you create a space where you can put down some equipment. You also look to equipment that you might put, for example, if you're a cyclist, putting the bike up onto a turbo. And so you create that space that is now your, if you like, training space within the house just for this while. Then the next thing I'll be looking at is embracing the technology, because we're very lucky today that the technology is so good to allow us to be able to train on a daily basis.
As in the online experience?
In cycling, yeah, the online experience. There's no doubt that that's one of the industries that will do quite well out of this. In terms of online experience, you have the likes of, if you're looking at cycling, you've got Swift. I know that VR racing, so you've got virtual racing for cars. So people are doing that. There'll be there's a switch over to that. Even down to the apps you can use for something like Freeletics, which is they have all these exercise plans that you can do in the living room of your own house, press ups and squats and burpees and different types of jumps and stuff. So there's a lot of tech out there that can actually help us. Swift now do running online as well.
If you're fortunate enough to have a treadmill at home, and some are, So Zwift is this online app which has allowed people to go for bike rides, a virtual bike ride in the company of others, and have a race if required. Similarly, you can go for a run, and in sort of in a virtual world, or in a representation of real, Central Park in New York or wherever. So it's grown like wildfire over the last couple of years, and I don't think this particular situation is going to do it any harm in a business sense, is it?
Well, absolutely. But then from the other side as well, you have the likes of circuit training we used to do years ago, which might be 10 exercises in a row. Some people lose, like CrossFit, they talk about now. So that type of, we've got these 10 exercises that you can do things like your stair running. If you've got stairs in the house, you can run up and down stairs. You can use different equipment or different exercises that you can do within your home as well. The goal really is to keep training. That's the goal. The goal is to maintain yourself as a runner, a cyclist, a triathlete, a motor racer, whatever it is, whatever your sport is to keep that you're always focused on still improving no matter what. And this is where, we talked about the opportunity. It is, people will see it in different ways. You will have some people will walk away from the season now and go, well, that's it now, sure, it's over. It's not over. You have an opportunity. You might be, even if you're confined to your house, you still have an opportunity to do flexibility training that you might not have done before. You might have an opportunity to work on core work, which you don't normally do. So you look at what you can actually improve while you're not doing your regular training. But from that point of view, then you need to be setting out your goals on a weekly basis to look to see what you want to achieve within the next week. And then you set out the schedule.
In some ways, the experience is not dissimilar to an athlete who's been injured and is in the recovery process, is coming back. And I know this is something you advise your athletes on a regular basis. And a lot of the take-home messages from that particular scenario are also relevant in this situation here with the coronavirus. That if you are confined to barracks, you can actually get working at a lot of things that you haven't really looked at too closely in the past. And it's not just about training aspects; it's also about preparation, getting yourself organized for your event.
Yeah. When it comes to the injury part, we've seen many athletes who've been injured who come back into the sport are actually stronger. In a lot of ways, because they've worked in areas that they wouldn't normally do. They've injured a leg, so they work on the upper body. And so when they come back, their core is stronger than it's ever been. And once they start building that leg back, then they're even better. So there's no reason why you can't have a similar situation to that now, where you're training different parts and also gain knowledge. It's a good opportunity to read more, to look even on YouTube at different videos, learn a little bit more about your sport. I did a course 2 years ago, going in the zone. We're still doing it. We have the online version now. But the going in the zone course, about 4 weeks before I did that, I decided to imagine what it would be like if I knew nothing about sports psychology or mental fitness training in any way. And I decided to spend a week just doing a deep dive or deep work just in that. And you'd be surprised, because what happens is, if you're a cyclist or a runner or triathlete or whatever sport you do, a lot of people think they know most things about it, which is true. But if you actually take some time to go back and read some stuff and go on YouTube, you'd be surprised what you can actually add into your training. So it is an opportunity to add knowledge as well,
right,
to your base, not just from a physical point of view, but also from a knowledge point.
So yeah, I mean, obviously every day is a school day, and there's always an opportunity, isn't there, to learn and to add to it. And that's something to be focused on. I suppose for endurance athletes, for athletes who have the right equipment at home, they can work on their physical preparation, their physical conditioning, and make sure that they've at least maintained that, or reduced the amount by which they lose fitness to the absolute minimum, so that when they can get back into competition, they're not at a disadvantage compared to everyone else. I suppose everyone is in the same boat, so from that point of view, that's where the opportunity lies. But for the athletes who compete in sports where technique is a huge part of it, I'm thinking about team sports, soccer, rugby, hockey, make a list, whatever it is, Gaelic games, etc. I mean, those field sports in particular, a huge component of their training would be in technique out in the field. That's something that I know that obviously that's where an awful lot of the anxiety is going to lie for athletes who are restricted in their activity at the moment. But for you do have one or two solutions to offer here.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, what we found, I did some research a number of years ago using GPS with football players, with Gaelic football players. And I had to watch the player as they were using the GPS device to see how many times to touch the ball, how many times to pass the ball. And what we noticed between the lesser player and the best players was not necessarily the fitness level, but watching the player out on the field was their technique, was their ability not just to run for a ball, but to pick a ball up at speed. And so what I started to realize was that you're having a lot of people out there who are getting extremely fit, but are not actually working on the skill based as much as they could. And we think they are, because they're going into a field, say, twice, 3 times a week, and have a match on Sunday. But they're not really working on the skill level as much as of what we would have done as kids, where you go out every day and you've got a ball in your hand and you just punching against the wall. Or if you're playing football, like soccer, again, kicking right foot, kicking left foot. So it's actually an opportunity to work on the skills. Just because you don't have rugby games or you don't have training with groups doesn't mean that you can't go out on your own and practice the skills, even if it's just passing the ball or punching the ball against the wall and back. You'd be very surprised what level of skill you can actually attain within a few weeks. And again, we've seen some amazing things where we've just given athletes some simple skill-based stuff to do. So if you are a football player, look at some of the skills that you want to develop. And even if you're just going out into the back garden and just practice right foot, left foot, picking the ball up or whatever it is, practice those skills. So again, you're coming back, you're going back to basics, but there's nothing wrong with going back to basics sometimes. It gives us an opportunity to work on those things. Even the other skill, if you look at field sports, for example, in athletics, you've got the likes of hammer and javelin, and so some of those things require minute changes. For example, in javelin, the position of a hand when it's put back, how the torso is used to actually make the javelin fly through the air. That can be practiced and often is practiced without a javelin at all. So again, these are the small little things that you can do back at the house. Not that you're going to be throwing rocks over at the neighbours, but you can still practice the skill to get into your mind over and over and over again. So it means you're not leaving your sport. You're still doing something, you're still looking at progress. And that's what we want, is progress all the time. And so even if you go back to basics, you're still going to get something out of it.
So tell me about visualization, because I know that this is a particular technique that obviously more and more athletes are going to and working on, and it can be particularly useful in a situation where they're restricted in the amount of activity, physical activity that they can get up to. So visualization can fill the gap.
Yeah, visualization is what I specialize in. Every single client I work with, I sit them in a chair, I get them to close their eyes, and we go through their competition, or we go through the different skills that they have to learn. A good example would be a professional boxer, for example. So a professional boxer coming into a fight, there's a couple of different techniques that we use from a visualization point of view. One would be the fight, the night of the fight itself, what it's going to be like to walk through the crowd, to have the noise of the crowd, what's going to be like to be in the ring, to see your opponent on the other side, to step forward, to throw the punches. And so you're practicing that before you even start. The other aspects, say again, taking a professional boxer, you might have, you want somebody to work on a certain combination. So the coach might say to them, look, we need you to be able to throw a left jab followed by a right hook. And so we can actually practice those things using the visualization. So I sit somebody in a chair, or we do it even online. Through Skype, you get somebody to sit in a chair, close their eyes, and actually visualize it. We record it, we give it to them, and they listen to this recording over and over again. And so this actually speeds up the skill, the speed at which you can learn a skill. And the question is, why? Well, it turns out that our nervous system cannot tell the difference between something that is vividly imagined and reality. So when we vividly imagine something as if it's really happening, our body responds as if it's really happening. And the example I always love to use is that you wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and you hear someone breaking into your car outside. What happens? Heart rate increases, breathing rate becomes rapid, muscles tense up, you reach for the baseball bat. Even if it's only a cat or a dog making the noise outside, it makes no difference. Because in your head, if you see it as the worst case scenario, your body literally responds to it. Now, in sports science, we know that visualization has an impact on the body. So just sitting down, closing your eyes, and going through your sport or going through the action, we can actually see tiny movements in the muscle in the same sequence as if somebody was actually, for example, throwing the javelin. I know Steve Backley years ago, there was a lot of talk about Steve Backley, who was the British javelin thrower at the time, one of the top javelin throwers in the world, had a bad shoulder injury. And what happened with Steve was when he came back into training, his physio said, there's no problem at all now. Physically, you should be fine. And he was well down on the throwing. So what was happening was his body was actually responding. That every time he went to go throw the javelin, there was a little thing in his head that went, no, don't overdo it, just in case you injure yourself a little bit more. So before the European Championships, there was talk of him doing over 1,000 throws in his head and far less in physical, and still got the results that they were looking at. So we know this through other research. Basketball players have increased their accuracy just by visualizing the throwing of the ball. So this is something that I would recommend to all athletes to do anyway. But when you have a time like this where you're not actually racing, it can be absolutely brilliant to be able to sit down and to go through the race in your mind as you want it to be. Because let's face it, we go through the race in our mind anyway. With people who, I know what it's like, Declan, you know what it's like to race. When you're driving to a race, you're still going through the race in your head. And if you've had a poor experience in the race before, chances are that's playing on your mind. So you're actually running what could possibly go through, could possibly go wrong in the race, and you're running this through your mind. And this has a physical effect before you even get there. So you might as well practice the use of this visualization in order to improve your skill and your confidence level coming into the next race. So you'd be very surprised that you of what you can actually attain just using visualization. It's one of my favorite techniques to use. Every top athlete in the world uses it, and so it is something that any athlete that I'm working with at the moment, they're certainly using at this
Yeah,
time.
and it'll give them that opportunity to just, as I say, offset that which they might lose by not being able to get out there. Not everyone else is going to do it, so it's an opportunity to sort of gain the unfair advantage a little bit, yeah. So that's certainly interesting stuff. Visualization, all about being organized, prepared, and having a plan. So what does the athlete or the sportsman or woman do about getting organized, getting that plan together?
Well, this is really important, is to sit down again, going back to the opportunity rather than what we're losing out on. So sitting down and looking at your goal over the next week, what would you like to attain? And then planning it out. Now, a lot of people out there already have coaches, so they have a schedule. All they're doing is just rejigging the schedule or their training plan, but putting it into a schedule is really important. Now, the next step to that, I would say, is to create a virtual group, a virtual team, if you like, that you're part of. And what this allows you to do is to have somebody that you're talking to on a weekly basis or during the week and saying, yes, I got out and I did X amount of kilometers or I did it even in the house on my bike inside. So you have people who are working out together, all as part of one group, all helping each other achieve the success that they want. So a lot of times what happens in a situation like this, especially when we're told to stay in more, to be isolated, is that they do isolate themselves and they withdraw from a club instead of becoming more involved. And so my suggestion on that is, rather than withdrawing from your sport, rather than withdrawing from your club, is actually to do more, is to be part of if there's a WhatsApp group on your club, make sure that everybody's still talking to one another, everybody's encouraging one another in terms of what training they might be doing at the moment, everybody's giving little tips to each other as regards how they can improve their training and stuff throughout the week. And I think that's really important as well.
Yeah, the essence of goal setting is all about, to a certain extent, having the long-term goal in the background and having the short-term goals at the forefront of your mind. And for so many competitors, they don't really know when they're competing again. So getting the processes right, I suppose, is particularly important at the moment.
Yeah, to be honest, right, we have athletes who will come in at the start of the year and they'll sit down and say, right, so my goal this year, the Olympics, for example, is very high on the agenda for a lot of athletes that we're working with. So they have set goals for later in the year. Now, what we do with that is we sit down. It doesn't matter whether your event is going to be the Olympics or it's a sportif that you're going to do in August. It really makes no difference because the process is the same. We sit down and we look and you write down what that goal is going to become or what you want to happen, and you have that outcome. But actually then we don't really worry about the outcome. What we look at is controlling the controllables, always control the controllables. And one of the things that we can control is the process. We can't control the outcome. As much as we want to, what we can control is the process, the habits that you put in on a daily basis. And what happens sometimes is when routine goes off, people just switch off. Well, no, if your routine goes off, you got to change the routine. So it might be a case that you're not going outside for your training sessions, or you're not meeting up with your team on a Tuesday and a Thursday night. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't do some training at that same time on a Tuesday and Thursday night, even if it's in your house. So you keep the same habits up as much as possible. If you normally train in the morning time, keep that habit up. One of the things that we always say to people to keep them motivated or to make sure they actually get stuff done is, if you're going to train in the morning, you have your gear ready the night before. So when you fall out of bed, you literally fall into your gear. So it's easier for you to get in. It's all about what James Clear in his book Atomic Habits says, about reducing the friction. We want to reduce the friction as much as possible with habits. That means that if you have to get up in the morning and you've got to suddenly think, gee, what am I doing today? or what can I do from training? Okay, where's my gear? Where's my runners? That's all of those things create friction, and they stop you from doing your habits and your process. Set your plan out at the start of the week. Let the outcome take care of itself. You can't control what's going to happen in the future, but you can certainly control what's going to happen today. And so you write down what your weekly thing is, but then also what your habits are going to be, the process it's going to have in place throughout the week. Reduce the friction as much as possible. Keep the gear beside you. Know when you're going to work out. Get into that virtual group. Even if you create a buddy online, my God, there's so many pieces of technology we can use now, from WhatsApp to Facebook Live to Zoom to webinar, go to webinar. It doesn't matter. Use a piece of software that you can talk to somebody through video now. We get to a point now where two people can actually work out in two different rooms using video stuff, and still get a good workout in. So that's what I would be saying, is stick to the process. The process never changes. The habits, the routine might change because of the way the thing is, but your process of putting a schedule in place, of putting the time in place and getting it sorted and getting it done, that doesn't change.
Yeah, it all sounds like pretty good advice for everyone in the population in these fascinating times that we live in, where we're all having to figure out how to adapt to a new reality. So, I mean, it is fascinating. All great advice, and Alan, thanks very much for that. I know you have a series of 7 steps or 7 strategic bullet points on how to go through this and achieve this plan.
Yeah. So a 7-step guide to maintaining your motivation through these tough times. So number 1 is focus on your opportunity, not on what you've lost. So instead of thinking about the fact that you're not getting your races in and all the training you've put in over the winter, instead of looking at that, look at the opportunity you have to increase other aspects, whether it's your flexibility training, your core strength, or even your knowledge about your sport. It's an opportunity there for you. Number 2, set those weekly goals and a schedule to go with those weekly goals. In the same way that you would normally do it, the training might change slightly, but the schedule remains the same. So you can keep those habits. Number 3, set up the equipment that you're going to need in the home. So decide whether you're going to need some weights, put them in one corner, decide whether you're going to put the bike on the turbo, whatever that is. Set it up so there's a space there for you that you're able to use it. Again, it takes away the friction of having to set this thing up all the time. Create that space for yourself. Number 4, embrace the tech. The use of virtual training apps such as Swift or Freeletics or any of those now allows us to train indoors. So embrace the tech on that. To create a virtual training group. Again, remain social. Talk to the people who are in your club. Just because you're not going and meeting up with people, whether it's your team sport on a Tuesday and Thursday night, where you're riding the bike out on a Sunday morning, continue to keep that social element up. We're humans. That's what we love. Number 6 is to focus on the daily habits and the process. It's not about the outcome. It's about process. It's about habits. And it's not even about motivation. People say, it's all about motivation. It's not. Motivation gets you started. Habits create success. Keep your habits, the nutritional habits that you have in place as part of your training, and add in the new daily habits that you might need to do in terms of the different training system you're going to use. And number 7, again, going back to one of my favorite things to do, is to actually use visualization. Use visualization. So you actually visualize yourself competing. And so they would be my 7 things. If you do that, you would be surprised how quickly we get through to the other side. There's one of my favorite stories, Declan. Sorry, I'm going to finish on this. I think one of my favorite stories is the old story of a king who wanted to be happy all the time. And he asked his wise man to go and find something that would make him happy every day. And so the wise man went away and he thought about it, and he came back to him with a ring. And engraved on the ring was the words, "This too shall pass." And he said, the way that you use these words is to understand that time passes. So when things are at their absolute worst, understand that this will pass. And when things are at their absolute best, understand when this will pass. So I've had many athletes who we've been at the top end where we're competing in a world championships, and I'm saying to the athlete, at some point this will end. So let's just enjoy the moment. Let's look around and say, isn't this really cool? But there are other times when things aren't going the way we want them to go. And we have to focus on understanding that it'll pass, and then focus on what we can do today, what changes we can make today, and what we can control today. So that's what I would be looking at.
Wow, absolutely stunning stuff. This too shall pass. The coronavirus, let's hope this time next year it's just but a distant memory. Anyway, that's fantastic and wise words, and thank you very much.